Stan, one thing that really interests me there is when you're talking about the overtraining or athletes getting burned out after a certain period of time. I remember you talking about Half Tour when you came to work with him first, and the initial thing you did was actually strip his weight back and then build it back up. And I think he got to somewhere around 200 kilos with abs. Is that a kind of factor of just giving his body a bit of a break? Or is that a very common thing you do with someone where the initial step would be to achieve a body composition and then move towards kind of a general mass figure?
Yeah, I think that's important for big athletes and just regular dieters. You need to achieve a particular body composition. I think you need to get your body fat into a healthy range. The larger you get, the more side effects that occur. You end up with metabolic syndrome, you get fatty liver, insulin resistance, high blood pressure, a host of things that are going to cause all kinds of health problems. And just losing 7% of your body weight, let's put a number on it. If you're a 300-pound individual, you only need to lose 20 pounds in order to realize about a 95% improvement in fatty liver and improve insulin resistance and drop your blood pressure by 20 points. So those things are pretty easy interventions to make, but it's hard to convince a large athlete to lose weight because mass moves mass and their strength is kind of tied to their size. And I get it. I'm a power lifter at heart, but there's a lot of changes that you can make without any weight fluctuations to improve. Now, like you said, the CPAP, the 10-minute walks after meals, improve postprandial glycemia, which improves blood pressure, just including more potassium and calcium in the diet improves blood pressure. So there's lots of things we could do. But more importantly, I think, obviously, you don't just train heavy all year round. You're going to periodize your strength training. And we do the same thing with weight. I don't think you should maintain that much body weight all year round. Just like you shouldn't maintain 5% body fat all year round if you're a competitive physique type athlete. You have to normalize that so you don't have, on that end of the spectrum, you don't have decrements in hormone levels and hypothyroidism and hypogonadism for testosterone lowering. So it's just not optimal body compositions to train at. And if you want to make progress in the off season, then I think that you need to be healthy. And so those are the interventions that we use to do that.
Oh, that's pretty interesting, actually. I've never heard anyone talk about periodizing weight for competitors. So let's say you had that kind of 300-pound athlete, and let's say he was a strongman, because we're talking about them. Would you be looking to come in at the heaviest possible for that strongman event, and then immediately after, would you taper off the weight as fast as possible, or would it be kind of a slow decline, start the prep phase, lose weight further? What would that kind of look like?
Well, this is another thing I learned from bulking up. Dirty bulking as far as the health issues go, but also then trying to cut weight too fast for bodybuilding shows, you lose a significant amount of muscle tissue. And so you're better off at least trying to get your body's set point, however much of that we believe. You're better off trying to hold on to as much lean mass as long as possible, and then to take the fat off more slowly. Having said that, the first 30 days, there's a lot of water, there's a lot of food bulk, there's there's certainly a significant excess of fat from the bulking time. So I can take, at least 10, 12 plus pounds off of somebody in the first 30 days and not have any impact on lean muscle tissue loss. After that, I want to be more gradual about it. I want to be cautious to only lose muscle mass. Now, of course, those using performance-enhancing drugs are going to have a much better chance of retaining lean body mass, and so that becomes less of a consideration. But yeah, immediately after a bodybuilding show, you want to reverse diet. You want to gain back your muscle without gaining back too much fat. So immediately after a powerlifting competition or a strongman competition, I think you want to lose some body fat in order to get your health back, because we know, as mentioned earlier, that health and fitness aren't generally compatible when you're competing, and you're going to have elevated blood pressure and usually all those other markers. I see, kidney and liver enzymes. One of the things that we mistakenly were doing, they did at the Arnold each year, was they would get blood tests for the athletes a day or two after the event, which of course, now your creatinine's just skyrocketed. And it's going to look poor on your kidney function just because of it's a, your EGFR is an estimation based on creatinine and weight, and so everything starts to obviously your AST ALT enzymes are going to be impacted mainly from myoglobin, muscle tissue breakdown as opposed to liver function, but those are all things that we consider, and so we want to as quickly as possible try and normalize those numbers, get our athlete healthy, get them at a reasonable body weight, and then that's a good time also to build their cardiovascular base if you're programming off season, which becomes really important. I think we had talked about discussing some of this, and I think that's a really important thing that a lot of large athletes, I can't say large athletes, but bodybuilders and powerlifters, and maybe even strongmen don't put enough emphasis on. The football players do. They definitely incorporate, even year round, a better. They don't get quite as big either, so carry quite as much body fat either. So that becomes really important. So we change the way they train. Obviously we just said we were going to periodize their training and periodize their weight. So we change the way they train as well.
Stan, on your point there of the blood tests immediately following the Arnold or immediately following a competition, and you obviously have these temporary heightenings of or possibly into like a risk factor in certain brackets of those values, how long after would you ideally wait from a competition before getting your blood test done?
I think 7 days would be sufficient on a normal circumstance when you're training regularly at home and not in a competitive situation. Probably 3 days out from a blood test would help to keep those AST, ALT, and creatinine numbers from being falsely elevated by, again, myoglobin breakdown. And this isn't just lifting. You go run a 5K the day before a blood test, you're going to see some of the same markers elevated. So I'm cautious of that. I don't do legs within about 5 days of a blood test, and I probably do my last lift about 3 days out, and then I go get my blood test so I can see what the numbers are, in the absence of all those interfering factors.
So you talk a lot about getting bloods as well. Do you think this is mostly a concern for athletes who are using performance enhancing drugs, or the frequency they might get them and the attention they would pay to particular things, or the lack of attention they might pay due to whatever they're using, for example? But do you think natural athletes, even from kind of the amateur athlete all the way up to the maybe closer to high performing athlete, is that something you'd be just as concerned about? And do you follow those same patterns and frequency of blood tests for the natural compared to a performance enhanced athlete?
It's certainly more important for athletes using performance enhancing drugs because there's potential really big downsides for health. Blood pressure being the biggest, the most immediate. That's a giant one. That's the first thing you want to intervene on is get, for these big athletes, get their blood pressure down, and then just weight loss and a CPAP and are kind of the primary drivers of that, and elevated blood sugars. But even the Olympic Center tests all of their athletes, and in terms of performance, if you've got things like vitamin D deficiencies, or particularly for endurance athletes and particularly females, iron deficiencies will have a huge impact. And so, we would like to see for competitive athletes a blood test, at least initially. If we find anything, then we can take action on that and do a subsequent test on those specific markers to make sure that we're making improvements.
Stan, where do you want people to go find you at the moment, or what's your kind of main kind of endeavors at right now?
Everything's at Stan Efferding. StanEfferding.com is my website. At Stan Efferding is my Instagram. I have some great YouTube content. My rants is going to be also Stan Efferding on YouTube. And of course, the Vertical Diet Meal Prep Company, available nationwide in the United States and UK now, is at theverticaldiet.com.